Hi, my name is Erik Johnson. I am a veterinarian down in Marietta, Georgia. I'm doing a series of videos on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, and I've put together some videos of me talking in the car. I've done some green screen and some topics. I hope you've had a chance to look at those. I also have a 20-step solution for fish disease cases, so that if you were to try to get in touch with me and figure out what's wrong with your fish, I decided to put together a 20-step process, and that's in my YouTube channel as well. This presentation is the first of hopefully many, where I take presentations that I've made in the past and make them available in a spoken format. And I think this is going to be particularly valuable if you get a pen and paper to jot down what you're seeing and what you're hearing. And the reason being is I don't read my slides, because that is boring. So what I'm going to do is I'm just using the slides as a cue card of what to talk about, and you can read them as we go along. And it might be, if I want to flesh something out a little bit more, I might insert another slide on top of that. Video presentation is done in PowerPoint, and it is control of parasites. It's pretty much what this one's about. And it talks about parasites in kind of general terms, but then we drill down into specific kinds of parasites. We'll talk about the Ciliates, and we'll talk about Flukes, and we'll talk about parasites that you can see with the naked eye. And actually, that is the three kinds of parasites that there are. And what I like about breaking them into those three groups is it's easier to get your head around them. In a nutshell, the Flukes are a simple story. There's 2 or 3 medications that work very well on Flukes. The differences in the management of Flukes has to do with whether you're treating systems with plants, or ponds that are huge, or ponds that are small, or fish tanks in the house, and certain sensitive species of fish. For example, you can't use superworm with goldfish. Alright, you probably wouldn't anyway, because nowadays Praziquantel is better for Flukes. Right now, Mardel Clout is being used for a lot of things, and I'm having great luck with it. As far as having actually gone through with a microscope and proven that Flukes clear with Clout, I haven't done that yet, but I am sure I have a video on Clout in my channel, and that will always be up to date regarding Clout and or what parasites it treats. I have found it very successful with the Ciliates. That's a category of parasites we'll be talking about. The ciliated protozoan parasites are so named because their bodies are, if you want to call them a body, these organisms are covered in tiny hairs, and these hairs, or cilia, are what these organisms use to move around. And the category of Ciliates is pretty full of parasites, except that what you're going to see on tropical fish and pond fish and koi and goldfish, Siamese fighting fish, are a small group of Ciliates. Probably the most deadly. In fact, I'm going to tell you the parasites most deadly to least deadly in the ciliate class. The most deadly ciliated protozoan parasite, both quick kill and chronicity and difficulty to diagnose, and perhaps even one of the hardest to treat, is Costia. The second hardest killer among the Ciliates is Trichodina. And you might notice I haven't said ick yet, because white spot disease announces itself, and it doesn't kill fish right off the bat in large groups. You start seeing white spots, the fish get weaker and weaker, and ostensibly you treat that with Clout. Actually, jot that down. Salt also works in elevating the temperature, but there are so many videos on ick that I've already made. Let's get back to it. The ciliated protozoan parasites are composed of Costia, Trichodina. The third most common or most deadly killer would be ick, And the fourth, I mean, it's a killer, but it's really not that big of a killer, is Trichodina. If Trichodina did anything, it is that it causes the fish to flash and scrape, and then that can cause the scratched areas to go into bacterial ulcers. Trichodina, along with most of the ciliated protozoan parasites, are stressful. So we're going to cover ick first. That's white spot disease, and we're going to cover it in the highlights. Now, I have a video in my channel of what these parasites look like under the microscope, and that's what they look like under the microscope. Basically, just a ball covered with cilia, and here's the thing: a U-shaped macronucleus inside. I know you knew that. Okay, I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but when you're looking at parasites at first, you're going to see all these damn round parasites, like Trichodina is round, and Ciliates is sort of round, and when you see that U-shaped nucleus in it, you should know right off the bat that's white spot. Can't be anything else. Okay, so the white spot disease, as we've talked about in other videos, depends on stress and cooler water. Ick has a hard time living in 78 degrees. The life cycle's so fast, and here's the reason that warm water has a tendency to wear out ick, is because the ick has two life cycles. There's a life cycle that is buried under the skin on the fish, and then there's a little packet of baby icks that goes to the bottom of the tank or pond. And there's this one phase right in the middle, boys and girls, where the packet on the bottom bursts open, and organisms called swarmers come out. Probably trophozoites or some crazy name. Anyway, these swarmers come out of the packets on the bottom. Well, they've got to find food pronto. And if the water's warm, they have to find food prontoer, or more prontly. And the swarmers in warm water have a problem attacking the fish, which are healthier in warm water, and getting to the fish in sufficient numbers to really pose much of a problem. So they basically just spend their energy in warm water. Cold water facilitates the swarmers, slows their metabolism down, the fish's metabolism down, allows the swarmers to get the upper hand, and so you see white spot. So knowing this, you know that warming the parasite up. I like 78 degrees, but everybody differs. I'm clearing ick these days with salt. Works fine. If you're worried about dosing or having chemicals around, you can use salt. And Mardel Clout. I just recently actually used Clout in a 360-gallon tank that I didn't want to salt. One of the problems with salt, and again, I hope you have a pen and paper handy. One of the problems with salt is you got to get rid of that water once the salt treatment is done, and salt is great, but salt's hard on live plants, and you have to get rid of that salty water. And really, in 360 gallons, you're using a pretty good bit of salt. I think something on the order of 10 to 12 pounds of salt. And but don't quote me on that in this particular video. Well, got ahead of myself. Actually, this slide talks about ick treatments, and it mentions salt. There is a form of this parasite that is under the skin, and there's another form that's down on the bottom in a packet, right? Well, the only place you can kill the ick is in the swarmer form, and salt waits. Salt waits to catch the parasite in the swarmer form, and that's the nice thing about it, is it's there all the time. You don't have to be dosing medicine that particular moment that a swarmer comes out. Swarmer comes out of the packet, tries to swim up, hits the salt, and crenates. And that's it. Salt is great. I prefer, honestly, Mardel Clout. The next parasite that I wanted to talk about is one called Trichodina. That parasite under the microscope is a flying saucer. and inside that flying saucer is a couple of rings, concentric rings of, believe it or not, teeth. And the edge of the Trichodina has cilia. That's how it motors around. And then the teeth inside the organism scratch away at the surface of the fish, loosening up mucus and other cells, and the Trichodina consumes those. And therein lies the problem. The Trichodina is very irritating to the skin, causes the fish to flash and scratch and all that. That's what gets infected. Trichodina is cleared 90% of the time with salt. And Trichodina is cleared very easily with formalin and malachite green combinations. And Trichodina really could almost be cleaned out of your fish collection just with clean water. This is especially true in ponds. Trichodina kind of sort of depends on leaf litter, mud, dirt, unclean environments, and stale water, high levels of background pollution for Trichodina to kind of get the upper hand. But almost everything works on Trichodina. Salt if you don't have plants in smaller facilities, formalin malachite if you have larger facilities and the water's not too warm. Mardel Clout clears it, assuming the facility is 1,000 gallons or less, because over 1,000 gallons Mardel is kind of expensive to treat it the way you would need to for Trichodina. Next parasite I want to talk about is Costia. Costia is a small parasite. Costia is a small parasite. You'll see it under higher magnification, something on the order of 150 to 200. You'll make it out, and then some of these videos show it at 400 power. You don't need that to diagnose it. What you're going to look for is silvery little commas, and they're swarming, and pretty easy to recognize. Probably the most effective treatment for that would be something like Clout, and formalin malachite also works pretty well with it. One of the things that's interesting about this particular ciliated protozoan parasite is Costia can dry on stuff. So let's say you had a tank full of Costia, and say you had driftwood. You removed the driftwood to treat the tank, and the driftwood dries out, so you're pretty sure that you don't have a disease organism going back in. And you put the driftwood back in there, and lo and behold, you have Costia again. There's the reason. It dried. And so, sometimes it's smart to leave ornaments in and treat the entire system and clear the Costia that way. Costia is a big-time killer. Ice water in the spring. Rapid mortalities. It has a tendency to insist. It has this little... has a way of attaching to a cell on the gills, and each cell it attaches to, it kills that cell. And if you saw the video that popped up, and I'm sorry about the audio on that, you can see that those organisms occur in the hundreds, if not thousands. So they're taxing the gills pretty hard, and that's why those fish die so hard in the spring. We talked a little bit about treatments for Costia. This slide reminds me of one, though. Formalin malachite is pretty effective at that, and you can use formalin malachite to clear Costia, because Costia doesn't tend to hide in or on the fish. So let's just say that you wanted to nail Costia before it got into your quarantine or your tank. You could treat with formalin and malachite in a plastic bag under oxygen, or well-aerated tub, any of a variety of containers. Just don't deprive them of oxygen, the fish. Put formalin malachite in there, something on the order of 25 to 50 parts per million. I think that works out to 1 cc per 10 gallons of water would be the appropriate dose in a, say, 5-gallon bucket with an aerator, assuming the fish are smaller. If it's a big koi, then you probably need to put it into a vat. And the 2-hour treatment probably isn't very effective. But 2 hours in formalin malachite will clear Costia on incoming fish. I like that method. And outside of that, in ponds, fish tanks, etc., if you want to get ahead of Costia, that's going to be Mardel, Clout, and formalin malachite green. Now, there are other treatments: potassium permanganate, chloramine T, and copper. All have a tendency to work on Costia. I don't like copper in fresh water. Copper can be, under quite a few circumstances, very unstable and result in copper toxicity. Seachem manufactured, if they don't still, a chelated or aminated copper. It's copper that's complexed with a protein, believe it or not. Cupramine is the name of the product. And it goes into the water, and the protein, the aminated component of copper, comes off at a very predictable rate, and it leaks copper ions into the system, which clears the parasite very effectively. I like cupramine, but there's other ways to do it. Salt is very gentle. Formalin malachite green, maybe not as gentle, consumes oxygen in the warmer water, and then but then Clout and is a very elegant solution. So this is Ciliates. It is shaped like a man's ear, is how I get people to recognize it. In sorry, I have audio with these videos. Ciliates is ear-shaped parasite, and it has a tendency to spin around like you nailed the end of it to the floor. There are other videos. In fact, in my YouTube channel, I've got a video of all the parasites under the microscope, which much more detailed videos of these different parasites, longer videos for you to compare. If you're using a microscope and looking at the microscope video, then you can switch over to this one and actually look at these parasites under the microscope. This one is just a survey of Ciliates, Costia, etc. And Ciliates is it's a hard killer. Comes up in the spring. Actually, it can work any time of the year, and especially in fish tanks. At 78 degrees, it's pretty happy. Fortunately, Ciliates is one of the easier ones to kill. Salt works really, really well, and Mardel Clout kills it. And I know you're probably tired of hearing about that, but looking at something that is safe for neon tetras and ram cichlids and Raphael cats and Brochus britsky, okay, and live, well, I think I said live plants. It doesn't kill your beneficial bacteria. It's easy to use. It's inexpensive, minimal staining. That's Clout. And that's the reason I'm mentioning it kind of a lot. Interesting thing on garlic. Not so much lately. Seeing a few parasites surviving it. Seems to improve the overall health of the fish, but doesn't actually clear at least two of the parasites, Flukes and Ick. So, leaving the ciliated protozoan parasites, that category of parasites, we're going to talk briefly about potassium permanganate, because potassium permanganate has a good spectrum against the ciliates, and kind of a side benefit, controlling bacterial infections in very large ponds. This slide, and you might pause the video for this data. This data is correct for using potassium permanganate in ponds. Trying to get 4 to 6 parts per million potassium permanganate. It's hard to do that in small fish tanks unless you're very experienced and very careful, in which case you treat with potassium permanganate to color. You kind of get used to the color that it is, and you apply it very gradually. It's just so easy to overdose. I would like you to be very cautious, or not use it at all. How about that? But potassium permanganate in facilities that are so big that using even a gallon of formalin malachite isn't enough to treat these huge facilities, then potassium permanganate, based on the fact that it is very inexpensive, would be one for you to look at in that regard. Now, as potassium permanganate goes, it is, to look at it, it's kind of a dark purple powder, and you put it in the water, it turns the water pink while it's active. You can see in the upper picture, you can see that Ginrin platinum ogon with the purple water over its back. That's an active treatment, and Once the potassium permanganate has spent the energy it's got on the parasites, then it turns to an amber or tea color. Make a note of this. If you treat with potassium permanganate and the water turns brown cloudy, you got a major water change to do. The fish do not thrive in brown cloudy water. And usually that means there is an overabundance of organic material. In other words, the pond started or the tank started out way too dirty for that first potassium permanganate treatment. Probably should have cleaned the tank out. But you're going to do that now. If the water's brown cloudy, you've got a major water change to do. Here's a ciliated parasite. God, you don't see this one very much. When I do, I'm kind of like whoever's with me. I go, oh, hey, look, come on over. It's Epistylis. Pretty easy to recognize. It's basically goblet shaped. It has a long neck on it, a ciliated rim around the top of the wine goblet. It's often mistaken for fungus. In fact, when you see cotton growths on the fish, mouth, fins, body, etc., you never really know whether it's fungus or columnaris bacteria or Epistylis. And so kind of knowing what it looks like under the microscope is sort of a thing, because you might see this. And then you know you have a ciliate, which is super easy to clear up with salt or Clout or Formalin or pretty much just about anything gets rid of it. Chloramine tea, which is in Jungle Lifeguard. Hope you wrote that down. And then you wouldn't have to embark on treatments for bacteria or fungus if you're looking at it and you can see it's Epistylis, you see. So sometimes using a microscope under those circumstances is extremely useful. So, ostensibly we have covered the first, and this is the major category of parasites, that's the ciliates. Now we're going to talk very briefly about parasites you can see with the naked eye. It's a group of 3 parasites: anchorworm, fish lice, and I think it's Argulus, gill maggots. I've seen one case ever. Guys that work over at the fisheries and are looking at catfish all day long and certain other fisheries and places see gill maggots all the time. I think I have a picture of some gill maggots. But anchorworm we see a lot. There's a picture on this particular slide of a white fish with anchorworms on it. They embed, somehow they know, to embed ventrally and hide behind the fins. You see these little red dots coming up, and if you look real close, there's these little glassy green-colored Y-shaped worms sticking out from under the scales. You can pick them off if you want, but that's a pain. Most of what you need is like an insect growth regulator. There's a compound you can usually find if you keyword search it on the internet called Express IDI. That's in the KoiVet pages as well, koivet.com/resources. And I might even have a link to it on this video description underneath. I don't know. But Express IDI is an insect growth regulator that works. Program, which are tablets for dogs, also work. That's active ingredient is lufenurone. And then there's a microbe lift compound that has the insect growth regulator in it that works very, very well too. The active in some of these is dimilin. You can also search for that. Sometimes it's hard to track that down. But the dosing on that is very low. And if you overdosed it by 10 times, it wouldn't matter to the fish. It is very, very safe. And I think I might have got ahead. So there's the anchorworm. One of the things I wanted to mention about anchorworm, besides telling you that you don't really have to pull them off, when the dimilin kills them, they just kind of fall off or rot away or whatever. Doesn't matter. I think when people pull off the anchorworm, they're actually creating more stress by handling the fish than they would if they just let the fish shed the anchorworm as the worms die. The other thing I want to mention about anchorworm is that anchorworm will chew on the fish and cause flashing, scratching, and that sort of thing for kind of a while before it shows up as the worm. There are, I guess, from memory, 7 larval forms, I guess, as it's molting through in a free-swimming version until before it even attaches and becomes the worm. The worm is actually a female organism. So you got your males and your babies all swimming around biting the fish, causing them to flash and scrape and get red and hacked off, clamp their fins. And then after 3 to 7 days of that, all of a sudden these worms show up, and you're like, oh man, that's the reason that they were scratching for the last so-and-so days. Lernea Control, that's anchorworm control, is again an insect growth regulator. They used to have anchors away, don't know if they still do. I haven't found it lately, but you'll see, well, that mentions Express IDI, that's still out there. And then Microbe Lift came out with a Larvadex compound, which is an insect growth regulator as well. So Argulus, here we go with some weird audio. The Argulus is a disc-shaped, greenish colored parasite. They're attached to the surface of fish. Goldfish, maybe not so much on mollies, because mollies are small, and fish lice are kind of big. Although I did see a fish louse eating a guppy, or at least parasitizing a guppy. Not the most common thing. Most of the time what happens is a client will call you up and tell you that their fish has unusual freckles, and you'll talk about shimi and a couple other things, but then they'll call you back and say, oh, by the way, the freckles have moved to other places on the fish. As soon as you hear that, you know that it's fish lice. Fish lice is nice because it's also treated with an insect growth regulator like Express IDI or Dimilin. Clears nicely, very quickly, 3-4 days, something like that. Argulus, basically the same thing. It's a parasite you can see with the naked eye. It's a crustacean parasite. Has to go through some molt cycles before it attacks the gills, and when you see it, all you have to do is put the insect growth regulator in it. It can't molt anymore, can't reproduce, dies, falls off. We're on to the last category of parasites, and that is the trematode parasites. And this section's actually fairly easy as well, because Flukes now respond. Well, I say Flukes now respond. They would always have responded, but there's new medicines on the market that make clearing the Flukes so easy in smaller facilities that it's almost a non sequitur. Probably in facilities under 1,000 gallons, and any of you with fish tanks, etc., planted or not, and I'm not talking to you saltwater people about this because I'm not sure about Praziquantel in saltwater tanks, most especially with invertebrates and corals. But in freshwater, there's a compound called Praziquantel, and it's available in bottles. I think Hikari has one called Prazi Pro. Generally, with this particular compound, you're going to see Prazi in the name. That's Prazi. Praziquantel. And your veterinarian also has, well, maybe has some Droncit tablets. That's pure Praziquantel. The problem is that Praziquantel in the Droncit or veterinary form is outrageously expensive. I think I did the math on it one time, and it would have, back then, it would have cost $300 to treat a 10-gallon tank. But now these importers that make things like Prazi Pro, etc., are bringing it in 55-gallon drums. It's brought the price down considerably, which is good. Praziquantel, like I said, has no effect on the fish or plants or biological filter. It also has no effect on ick or any of the ciliates either. It is a specific treatment for flukes, and it works amazing. One thing I'd like you to know about flukes is it's the primary mode of transmission for ulcer disease in koi. Almost always when you see ulcers, you're going to see flukes associated with that. And this picture is fabulous because what you can see, this is the base of a fluke. This is basically his foot, and you can see a ring of little teeth. They're not. They're actually vicious toenails around the center, which has two J-shaped hooks, and those J-shaped hooks are anchors. Basically, the fluke will use his suckers on his head and his little razor toenails to move around on the fish. Once he finds a place he's happy, he'll dig those two hooks down into the skin nice and deep, and then the fish can't dislodge them, or at least he can't dislodge them easily. And where those two hooks go down into the skin is where the ulcer will start, in the skin, because it's a deep break in the skin and the fish are under stress with the flukes. And if it's in springtime or high crowding situations, it can be just about explosive. Fluke Control, it used to have Fluke tabs. Don't know if we still do. They were just okay. Kind of expensive. And they were made in England, and they used to send over just however many they felt like sending over. So sometimes halfway through the season, they would be gone. And so recommending them was hit or miss, because you might be recommending them in June and there aren't any left in the United States. Mardel Clout has come along and testing whether or not the flukes die with Mardel Clout. I'm 99% sure that they will, based on the way Clout actually works. But I'm not going to stick my neck out right here, especially with a medicine called Praziquantel working as well as it is. So if you think you have flukes, I'm going to suggest that you would reach for, in all probability, either Clout or Praziquantel, which, by the way, you can use together because they work two different ways and are not metabolized by the fish. They are very effective topically. If you had a microscope, you wouldn't have to guess. If you had a microscope, this is not a hard parasite to recognize because it's a stretchy worm versus any of the other parasites. And if you did a skin scrape biopsy, and you'll be able to find a video in my channel of how to do that, if you did a skin scrape biopsy, you'd be able to tell what the parasite actually was before you had to do a shotgun treatment. Fluke Control on goldfish, again, very, very simple. Used to have superverm. We don't want to use that on goldfish. Superverm's getting harder and harder to get with the advent of Praziquantel. Again, goldfish, get with Praziquantel. The only problem with it is it's not effective financially in facilities over 2,000 or 3,000 gallons. Koi and ponds, you can use other compounds. Flukes will be controlled with serial application of formalin malachite green. It takes a little bit more formalin than most of the published doses, so you kind of have to make it up as you go along, and it helps when you're using formalin malachite. It helps to have a microscope to make sure that you've got the parasite cleared. So in koi ponds that are kind of financially, they're a little bit too large to use Praziquantel, you might reach for formalin malachite, actually, or potassium permanganate. Potassium permanganate is not by any means my favorite. Chloramine T also clears flukes. Actually, it clears flukes pretty well. Problem is it's available in a compound called halamid at very reasonable if you want to buy 5 pounds of halamid, which will last you for the rest of your life. Also maybe hazardous to have around your house, but it's also kind of dangerous for the fish. There's some companies out there, Lifeguard is one, that has tamed the chloramine T and put it in their Lifeguard product, and it works pretty well against the specific things that it's intended to work for. It is not a cure-all or panacea the way they're selling it, but it is effective as a hobbyist version of chloramine T. I hope you wrote that down. Flukes in large ponds, why don't we just gloss that over and let you read the slide? Because, I mean, really, if you have a very large pond that you need to clear of flukes, you probably would be better just to get with me at the office and we'll strategize something. The economics of me helping you at maybe $100 to $150 for the consultation would save you back what you would spend in the chemicals, because we probably would be talking about organophosphates. So, we've talked about the 3 different parasites, 3 different categories of parasites, and to give you a brief recap, we're talking about ciliated protozoan parasites, which are Trichodina, Kilodinella, Costia, and Ick. Those 4 parasites have a tendency to respond very well to salt and or malachite green. You can also use potassium permanganate, and you can use formalin malachite green with pretty good results, especially in pond environments that are large. And the second category of parasites we covered was anchorworm, fish lice, and gill maggots. Those 3 you can see with your eyeball, and they're cleared with a insect growth regulator like Express IDI. And finally, the trematodes or flukes. You've seen those pictures of them. They are stretchy worms, and they are easy to clear with a compound called Praziquantel, which is available in PraziPro, and other similar competing products. I mean, like I said, you're going to see Prazi in the name or in the ingredients list. That picture right there happens to be a Plecostomus in a 20-can cooler. That thing is about 17 inches. That's what happens when you put a Plecostomus in a koi pond for the summer. 1 year. And then in the fall, when the pond hits 55 degrees, they die summarily. They can't stand it at 54. They get very lethargic between 60 and 55, but they'll live. At 55 degrees, enzyme systems shut down. There's no way around that. And a lot of times you put your you put your Plecostomus in there, and there's no way to get it out. They blend in with the bottom, and this has absolutely nothing to do with control of parasites. Just kind of a cool fish. That's it, man. I appreciate you checking out this video.